All right, here we go with the final chapter of The Fall of Fergal, chapter 11. Brought to you by my sister's sunny backyard. Back in room 1428, the celebrations were still underway. LeFay was a hero for having won the competition, and Fergal was a hero for having exposed the cheat. In all the excitement, they'd forgotten about the prize itself until Jackie caught sight of the golden envelope sticking out of the pocket in LeFay's dress. "Go on, LeFay, open it," she said. LeFay opened it. Inside was a voucher for a very expensive, state-of-the-art, top-of-the-line computer with every conceivable attachment and gizmo. Printer, scanner, camera, you name it, it had it. Exchangeable at any electrical or computer store, LeFay read, her eyes widening in wonder. Then she looked a little sad. "Of course, we must collect the computer and then sell it," she said. "Yeah," said Albie excitedly. "Think of all the shopping we can do with that." "The repairs we could make to the apartment," said Joshua. "We could feed Smokey every day so he doesn't have to catch rats," said LeFay. "We could live off the money from selling the computer for ages," said Fergal. "No," said Jackie. "No, what do you mean, no?" demanded Albie. "I mean that LeFay won the computer, so she gets to keep the computer," said Jackie quietly. "We could always sell the computer and buy a cheaper one along with all the other stuff we need," said LeFay. "No," said Jackie. "You want it, you deserve it, and who knows, we might even find a way for you to make money with this fabulous computer and your keyboard skills." LeFay threw her arms around her big sister and gave her a hug. "Thank you," she cried. Albie was about to protest until Jackie gave him one of her no-nonsense stares over LeFay's shoulder. He knew when he was beaten. There was a knock at the door. "Who is it?" asked LeFay. She and the others half expected it to be Malcolm Kent, who'd been so nice to them from the word go. When the person on the other side of the door announced himself to be Charlie Tweedy, it threw LeFay into an unnecessary panic. "It's the chief house detective," she hissed. If any of them had stopped to think rationally for 1 minute, it would have occurred to them that they could have pretended to have all gone up to the room at the end of the competition to celebrate. No one need know that they had planned to spend one last night in it. But LeFay had told them about her meeting with Captain Tweedy, and they had all witnessed the very strange way he'd behaved in the foyer earlier. And LeFay's irrational panic was contagious. Albie and Joshua ran straight for the bathroom at the same time and became briefly wedged together in the doorway. Jackie snatched up what evidence there was of their being in the room and was about to head into the bathroom too when she saw Fergal leaning out of the window. LeFay said that she thought Fergal might have been looking to see if there was an outer ledge that he could step out onto and hide. LeFay later said she thought Fergal might have been looking to see if there was an outer ledge that he could step out onto and hide. Whatever his reason, Jackie turned and cried, "Don't lean out of that window!" But as we all know from hindsight, it was too late. Fergal fell. Jackie dashed across the room and leaned out, grabbing at thin air. She let out a pained cry of "No!" stretching the last O to last a good 15 seconds. What I neglected to mention before was that the cry turned into a howl, and by the time the remaining McNallys had thrown open the door, streaming past a startled, twinkle-toes Tweedy who'd heard the howl and had no idea what was going on, Jackie had turned into a jackal. Why else do you think I said that there was more to Jackie's nickname, Jackal, than her snapping and snarling back on page 8? Why else would she, a grown woman, have to jump up to press the down button at the elevators on page 22? Who else do you think was the furry creature shown in the wonderful illustration on the following page? Look between those running legs. Who else could have left thick dog-like hairs on LeFay's curtains? And what about Jackie's suspiciously good hearing for a mere human I mentioned on page 101? Well, it's because she was no mere human, of course. A shame none of the others had Jackie's amazing abilities. Though that's not to say that they won't turn out to have some very distinct ones of their own. Their late mother named them for specific reasons. The clues are there. There are 3 books in this series, and something has to happen in the other 2. If Fergal had been able to turn into a golden eagle or even a hedgehog with a parachute, things might have turned out very differently indeed. And think how Captain Charlie Twinkletoes Tweedy felt when he later pieced together what had happened. Though fortunately he didn't realize that the dog he'd seen dashing from the room and the big sister weeping by her dead brother were, in truth, one and the same. He'd come to room 1428 to share in the good news and delight at having come across them after all these years, the children of the man who'd saved his life as a young sailor, and in the process, he'd indirectly led to one of them falling to his death, which wasn't the best way to say thank you. Captain Tweedy was beside himself with mixed measures of grief, guilt, and anguish. The only thing stopping him from falling to pieces was being stronger for Jackie, Albie, Joshua, and LaFay. Someone else who was brilliant in that role was Malcolm Kent of Tap and Type. I have to say that he's a person I'd be greatly honored to call a friend. Much of the rest you know. Fergal was taken to the morgue at the Sacred Heart Hospital, while Tweedy, Malcolm, and the management of the Dell did what they could to comfort the McNallys. "Should I call your father?" said Malcolm, who hadn't found a contact number in LaFay's competition file. "We don't have a phone at home," said Jackie, "and I don't want anyone else going around telling him." In the end, they all went home that night. The Dell had a minibus they used for staff outings and special occasions. It had never been sent on such a sad mission before. Charlie Tweedy drove, Jackie gave directions, and Malcolm sat with Joshua, Albie, and LaFay, the forgotten computer voucher crumpled in the golden envelope in her pocket. Does some good come out of the tragedy? In this case, I'm pleased to report yes. The fall of Fergal certainly made a better man of Captain Rufus McNally. He cried at the news in a way that startled all his remaining children. They'd expected him to bottle up his grief like his anger and to take it out on them and the bottles. But he sobbed floods of tears, and, as they were to discover over the following weeks, those tears did much to wash away his bitterness, sickness, and twistedness. He became much more the man he'd once been before collecting all those bottles. He became the man of Tweedy. He became the kind of man Tweedy recognized as the person who'd saved him all those years before. Sure, he'd lost a leg and gained a big red nose, but this was the guy who'd risked his life so many times to save others. He even tore up the note from his doctor that said he was excused parenting. The two captains, one a retired sea captain and the other a retired police captain, became firm friends. Malcolm became a close friend of Jackie and the children. He became close enough to learn Jackie's secret that she could become a jackal, and the secrets of Albie, Joshua, and LaFay as they themselves discovered them. They never forgot Fergal, of course, but not for the reasons you might think. For some reason, it was important for the pathologist to weigh Fergal's brain, perhaps to work out how much of it had slopped out of the boy's ears, nose, throat, and perhaps the odd eye socket or two. Unfortunately, the scales had broken when, during his lunch hour, Dennis, the assistant pathology lab assistant, whose usual summer job was selling ice cream, remember, had tried to weigh his bull terrier in them while the boss was out. So what should Dennis do until they were fixed? He decided to pop Fergal's brain in one of the large jars he'd seen on the draining board by the huge stainless steel sinks running along one wall of the morgue. He picked up the brain with his gloved hands and glooped it into a jar. It reminded Dennis of an overcooked cauliflower. Now all he needed to do was to add some of that preserving liquid. What was it called? Formaldehyde, that was it. So that it'd stay in one piece until the scales were fixed and his boss could weigh it. Dennis was sure that his boss would be proud of his quick thinking, and as a result wouldn't be quite so annoyed that Dennis had not only broken the special scales, but had got dog hairs everywhere in the first place. The problem was that there wasn't a drop of formaldehyde to be found. Muttering under his breath, Dennis dashed out of the basement entrance of the hospital, up some stairs littered with ancient leaves from previous autumns, now dry and skeletal, and across the street. A few blocks down, he reached Ma's pickling store along the bottom of the store sign, of which was written, "For all your pickling needs." He hurried inside and had little time to exchange pleasantries with Ma, who was, if the truth be told, Mrs. Bloinstein, a friend of Dennis's Aunt Patty, and would no doubt report to her that her nephew, Dennis, had come to her store during his hospital working hours to buy a gallon of pickling vinegar. Dennis dashed back down the street, across the road, down the steps, and into the Sacred Heart Hospital's basement morgue, carrying the plastic gallon bottle of pickling vinegar as fast as his legs could carry him. He'd poured it into the jar containing Fergal's brain and just fitted the tight seal lid when a man in a white coat appeared, wheeling a cart stacked with hospital supplies. "Hi, Dennis," he said. "No one else around?" "No," panted Dennis. "Then you'll have to sign for this. A fresh supply of formaldehyde. Okay?" "Okay," said Dennis, snatching the pen and signing. The guy in the white coat wondered why Dennis was glaring at him as he piled the bottles of formaldehyde onto a wooden workbench. What had he done to upset him? He sniffed the air. "Do I smell vinegar?" he asked. "Don't be crazy," said Dennis, handing him back the clipboard and pen. "Who'd be insane enough to eat anything in here with all these bodies around?" "True," the man nodded. "Hey, what happened to those scales?" "Don't ask," Dennis sighed. That night, when the small masked burglar broke into the morgue of the Sacred Heart Hospital, he was very disappointed. He had hoped to find row upon row of jars of human brains to choose from. There were always row upon row of brains in Frankenstein movies when the scientist's assistant, Igor, broke into the place, so why not here? All the small masked burglar could find was one, and it was labeled Fergal McNally, Juvenile, and it had a slight whiff of pickling vinegar about it. "It'll have to do," muttered the small masked burglar to himself, "which is convenient for us. I only hope that the master is pleased." With that, he stuffed the jar containing Fergal's brain under his sweater and hurried out into the night, heading for Fishbone Forest. The ground rumbled beneath him. "Oh no, not another hole," he muttered. Which was all very unlikely indeed, wasn't it? The end of the first exploit. This is the epilogue that's at the end of a book. Remember, the author's name is Philip. Philip? What? Is that really the end? It says so, doesn't it? But does it have to end here? Every story has to end somewhere. But here? Here's as good as any place. Everything's rather neatly tied up, if the truth be told. But what happened? What happened next? Would you settle for and they all lived happily ever after? It's rather unlikely, isn't it? Especially if Fergal isn't living at all. And who's the small burglar? And who's his master? Good point. I suggest you read the second unlikely exploit, Air of Mystery. I didn't know you'd written a sequel. That's because I haven't. You haven't? I haven't. Then, yet. And this is a little information about the author, Philip Ardag. Over 6 feet 7 inches tall with a bushy beard, Philip Ardag is beyond a doubt not only very big, but also very hairy. He writes fiction and nonfiction for all ages, and his Eddie Dickens trilogy books are bestsellers. When not writing silly books, Philip Ardag is very serious indeed and frowns a great deal. He lives in a seaside town somewhere in England with his cat, his wife, and their son, Fred. Willa. Willa. Come here. Willa, come here. I have some special guests that would like to say hello. Come here, Willa. Come here. Come here. Say hi. Come here. Let's say hi. She's right here. Micah. Come here. Come here, Micah. You can remember from some grammar correcting sentences, I did mention my sister's dogs one time. Come here, Micah. Come here. Willa and Micah. This is Micah. Say hi, Micah. Say hi. All right, I hope you enjoyed the book.